we see really the Father's heart from Genesis to Revelation, or reverse engineered from Revelation to Genesis. Then the question really is, what's it going to take? Right? What's it going to take to see this happen? And so we want to kind of throw some numbers on it for you this evening. And I'm going to throw up some numbers for the Triangle area because that's where we are. But I'm going to give you some time, or I know we're a little behind on time, but that's all right. I'm going to give you some time maybe to put that back in your tables, and maybe if you know the statistics for your own town or where you labor, can be helpful there too. So, all right, since we're here in the Triangle area, we're gonna start with brutal facts for the RDU. And so what we want to do is start with population. All right. Anybody know the population of the ever-growing Triangle area? It's a little higher than 2. It's about 2.2 million. Somebody said it. 2.2 million, and it's growing. And so that includes Raleigh, Durham, Cary, Apex, what we would know of as the Triangle area. 2.2 million people. Now here's the question though. About what percentage of those people do you think are far from God? When we're talking about people percentage-wise who are far from God, we can't know that for sure because people will give answers on surveys that maybe say they're believers and they're not, or the other way around. But I think 75% is probably a good estimate. I say good estimate. It's probably a very, very conservative estimate. If you go out on the streets, it's probably much higher than that. But we can use 75% for our purposes today. So how many people is that? Putting a number on it. I'm not going to ask George, as he doesn't want to do these numbers, but anybody who's better with numbers. 1.6? It's 1.6 or 1.65? 6.5. Hey, y'all going to make me do my own numbers. All right. 1.65 million people. Now, just pause for a moment and think about that. Out of 2.2 million people, 1.65 million, if they died today, they'd be separated from God for all of eternity. This task that we just looked at a moment ago, God's heart for the nations, that He desires that we would be on mission to reach the nations. Well, 1.65 million people right here, right in our backyard, are far from God. Just want to let that burden us for a minute. So the question we like to ask is, I asked it at the very beginning, what's it going to take? By the way, is there any place in Scripture where, we see maybe 1.65 million people or more, a large number of people that have been reached in a short period of time? Yeah. Somebody want to read for us Acts 19, 8 through 10?
Paul entered the synagogue and spoke boldly there for 3 months, arguing persuasively about the kingdom of God. But some of them became obstinate. They refused to believe and publicly maligned the way. So Paul left them. He took the disciples with him and had discussions daily in the lecture halls of Tiberias. They went on for 2 years, that all the Jews and Greeks who lived in the province of Asia heard the word of the Lord.
So how long did it take?
2 years.
2 years, and how many people? Doesn't say it in the text. Anybody know? All the people. Anybody have a number on that, an estimate? 2.5. There was about, conservatively, 8 million people. Probably about 8 to 13 million people in that area at that time. And in 2 years, in the span of 2 years, everyone heard and had an opportunity to respond to the gospel. By the way, that's what we call hashtag NoPlaceLeft. Just in case you were waiting when that was going to come in. I'll even write it up here. Right? So, so in 2 years, we saw this vast majority of people being reached for Christ. Here in our context, 1.65 million people. But again, again, we have to, just using that language from just a moment ago, we've got to prioritize disciple making. We've got to prioritize disciple making among those who are near and dear to us, or those who are around us. Disciples making disciples, and we've got to be reaching out to the lost. So 75%. Now, studies show that if you can get 10% of something, or 10% of a population doing something, then everybody will know about it. Like they may not know the ins and outs about it, but if you got 10% of the population doing something, at least people have heard about it. So just roughly using those numbers, oftentimes we're going to call this our target percentage. What's the total population? 2.2, right? So really, for everybody to hear about it, percentage-wise, really 10% of this number needs to be on board, or at least be actively sharing. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So what's 10% of 2.2? I'm going to show you how this works. 220,000. So we need 220,000 people, not only that have heard about Christ, but who are laborers, is what we're looking for. Not just a number on a page, but actual laborers to be sharing the gospel, to be gossiping the gospel, as we might say. We need 220,000 in order for this 2.2 to really be saturated. Now, let me ask you this. If 1.65 million people are far from God, how many are we saying are actually Christians? Was it 550? Right? 550,000. You see the disconnect? See this disconnect? We've got 550,000 people that are claiming to be Christian. We need 220,000 people to saturate the culture. What's happened is these 550 people haven't caught a vision. They're not on mission. And so we've got 550,000 people out there claiming to be Christian and just haven't been equipped, or they're not on mission, which is a big deal. In fact, statistics say 98% of those claiming to be Christian are not actively sharing their faith. That's the disconnect between these two numbers right here. How does that make you feel? Just all of these numbers. I don't like to get in the numbers game, but this is just like a shock and wow, or shock and awe kind of thing, right? To wow you. So we really do need laborers. We need laborers. We need 220,000 total laborers to impact this 2.2 million. Where are we going to get them from? Where do we find them? Somebody says something. Sure. So we've got some that are right here in this number, right? 550. So I would say in that 550,000, we need people to catch the vision and give them some tools. Y'all all right if I put this number down here? This is our target number. Where are we going to get it from? Where else are we going to get it from?
Harvest.
I know this is ugly, guys, but we're working up here, right? We're working. 1.65 million people is really our harvest field. And so what do they need? They need the gospel. They need the gospel, and they need some training, some discipleship, right? So in order to get these two, we need some from the 1.65 million and some from those who are already in our churches. And we don't have to put a number on how much needs to come from either place. But from my experience, God's always provided in the harvest. And guess what? When you go and you tap people on the shoulder in churches, usually people respond to that as well. We just need a fervor. We need a passion about what God's passionate about. We need to catch that vision. And then just everywhere we go, start asking people and start just dropping this vision in there that people might respond, and we can get to this, it's not a magic number, but 220,000, so that we can saturate this 2.2 million people. And by the way, this number is growing every day. That 2.2 million people is growing every day, so we just need more and more. So just think about those numbers. Now, What about churches, right? We've talked about churches for just a little bit. How are we going to hold all these people? How are we going to hold all these people? How many people are in a normal church? It's too easy, right? Say we were to say that for these 1.65 million people, say 10% of them come to Christ. We're talking about 10%, the 1.65 million people. How many is that? 165,000, right? Y'all organize this how you need to, right? If 10% of this comes, that's 165,000 people. If we're going for 100 churches or 100 people in a church, how many churches is that? 1650. 1650 new churches. How much does an average church plant cost? 200,000. We can go with 200. I'm okay with 200,000. Over the span of 3 years, it's actually projected that it costs us $250,000 for every church plant. For 3 years, get a pastor, get a building, get all those things. So we're going to put that kind of money into it. $250,000 for that many new churches, 1650. How much money is that? $412 million. Where are we going to get that money? You realize that in the state of North Carolina, we have about 4,600 churches plus, and our whole state budget is $30 million. Southern Baptist Convention as a whole, their annual yearly budget is $200 million. Which, by the way, those are massive amounts of money. And even those being that massive, look at that number. So now we have to ask the question, what is it going to take? How are we going to get there? If we're going to accomplish this grand mission that George just talked to us about, if we're going to accomplish this thing, if we're going to go after the kingdom together, yeah, maybe it looks a little bit like this sometimes, but guys, something's got to change. We got to think differently. We've got to do exactly what we just talked about. We've got to take how things are and how things should be, and in the middle, let's strategize out of our abiding that God might bless it so that we can accomplish His plan and His purpose. What's it going to take? The other question is, are you willing? What are you willing to give up? Right? Are you willing to give up everything for this? How much are you willing to give up for this? How much are you willing to give up for this? 1.65 million people far from God.